On Sunday the 30th of July last month, a 27-year-old man named Yohanes Kidane was captured on a surveillance camera checking into an Airbnb in Seattle, but bizarrely, this would be his last official sighting. He was eventually reported missing by his concerned family on the same day, as he had failed to confirm his arrival as promised. However, they wouldn't find any more evidence until 2 weeks later, when Jared's car was mysteriously discovered over 1,000 miles away in Los Angeles, covered in parking tickets. Unfortunately, there was still no sign of Jared himself, and police have been urging the public to keep an eye out for the newly appointed immigration lawyer. But with this case now nearing its 1-month anniversary, the situation is only growing in suspicion, which has led many people to wonder, where is Yohanes Kidane? And could this case be linked to a string of recent disappearances across the West Coast, including Yohanes Kidane, another young man of North African descent who also went missing under strange circumstances last week? Yohanes Kidane was born in Queens, New York, but later decided to move to North Carolina to chase his dream of becoming a professional lawyer, which he would successfully achieve in just 3 short years. After receiving his JD from Duke University, he quickly began his search for a job in immigration law. Jared had made this career decision as his own family had emigrated from Lebanon, and so he was well aware of the struggles that immigrants have to deal with when entering the country. His friends say he is an extremely dedicated individual who is passionate about justice, and so it wasn't long after his graduation that he managed to land a job with a law firm called Grossman, Young & Hammond in Maryland. Jared appeared to love his job and was fully dedicated to his career for around 5 years. However, something seemed to change towards the end of 2022, when he suddenly decided to leave his position at the firm. Little is known about why he made this decision, but friends assume it had something to do with the emotional toll that being an immigration lawyer brings. Jared's childhood friend Kiara Dalton also mentioned that he is an extremely hard-working individual who loves to travel, so it wasn't too much of a surprise when he eventually decided to head off on a single-person road trip across the country to experience the diverse culture that America has to offer. Although this was something that concerned his friends and family at first, Jared was seen as a very capable and intelligent man, so they were quietly confident that he would be able to look after himself. The official date he decided to leave for the trip is unknown. However, we do know that he left from the East Coast and that he eventually made it to Seattle at some point in July. But strangely, upon finally making it to his desired destination, it wasn't long before Yohanes Kidane would unexpectedly disappear without a trace. On the 30th of July, Jared arrived in Seattle, Washington, where he planned to stay at an Airbnb in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. He was captured on surveillance cameras outside the property and was seen moving his items inside, but once he had finished, he strangely walked out of sight and didn't return to the property. It is unknown if he had any plans that day, but it could have been plausible that he wanted to go for a walk or a drive to explore the area. He had initially agreed to inform his family once he arrived at the Airbnb, but he never got around to sending a message, which concerned his family who were on the other side of the country in New York at the time. They attempted to get in contact with Jared all day, but when they didn't receive a text or a call, they eventually decided to officially report him missing to the Seattle police. On the 31st of July, the authorities started an informal investigation into the disappearance of Yohanes Kidane. However, given that he had only been missing for a day, they weren't too concerned at first. But as the days passed, with still no sign of Jared, the police began to take the case more seriously, dedicating one of their teams to further investigate his whereabouts. A friend of Jared's, named Patrice Morgan, told the police that it was very much unlike Jared to suddenly go off the grid like this, so his disappearance made absolutely no sense. The search team then spoke to the owner of the Airbnb, who claimed that Jared had failed to pay his rent despite leaving all of his belongings in the property, which raised alarm bells. The police also spoke to Jared's landlord back in Maryland, where he was living before his trip, and apparently he had failed to make payments for his rent, which was due on the 3rd of August. given that Jared was a respectable professional that had never missed a rent payment in his life, this again raised serious concerns within the Seattle Police Department, who by now had realized they had a potentially fatal case on their hands. On the 8th of August, the police formally declared Jared as missing and started spreading his image around the public to raise awareness about the case. He had now been missing for over a week with absolutely no contact with his friends or family. He had also left all of his belongings, including his cell phone and laptops, in the Airbnb, which rendered him completely isolated with no digital footprint to trace. So with very little evidence to go off, the police were now just relying on potential tips from the public to assist in the search, as well as a private investigator who was hired by the Kidane family. The name of this PI is currently unknown, however through meticulous determination, they were eventually able to track down Jared's car, but despite this major break in the case, it only seemed to raise more questions. It was on the 17th of August that Jared Shideed's car was officially discovered in a Los Angeles neighborhood, approximately 1,000 miles away from where he was last captured on surveillance cameras in Seattle. His white Volkswagen Tiguan was successfully tracked down around 3 weeks after his disappearance. However, after searching the surrounding area, there was still no sign of Jared. A member of the neighborhood would later claim on an Instagram post about Jared's disappearance that they spotted the white car on their own surveillance camera, driving past their house on the 31st of July, 1 day after he disappeared. However, this information is yet to be verified by the police. But even if true, this still doesn't confirm if Jared was actually driving the car at the time, so we will have to wait and see what the police can come up with. Since the car's discovery, it has been almost 2 more weeks at the time of recording, and there are still no further updates on the case. However, it is possible the police are purposely withholding vital information as to not tip off any potential suspects that they are investigating. So for now, it's probably for the best to give them a bit more time. But unfortunately, this is all we know for now, so until more information is released, we can only sit back and hope that this story somehow gets a happy ending. However, with Shideed now being missing for almost an entire month, his safe return is looking more and more unlikely. But with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding Jared's disappearance, it has to be noted that this young man is a very independent person. I mean, he decided to abruptly quit his job and travel the world all on his own for several months, so it certainly wouldn't be too surprising if Jared decided he had grown tired of everyday life and made the choice to just go off grid and live in peace, despite what his friend claims. However, given that he left all of his belongings in the Airbnb he had just moved into, this certainly raises some red flags, as this would just make no sense. Also, although he was certainly independent, that doesn't necessarily mean he was unsociable and wouldn't miss his friends and family if he was to purposely disappear. So for me, this theory is a huge stretch, and I would sincerely doubt somebody like Jared would ever do something like this. But until we know more, we can't rule out the possibility that this disappearance could have been intentional. But if my instincts are correct and this wasn't a planned disappearance, what else could explain his sudden vanishing on the 30th of July? Foul play would seem to be the only other option, given that Jared surely wouldn't have left all of his worldly belongings in a nondescript Airbnb if he was planning to end his own life. I'd assume he would have at least set something aside for his family, unless it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, but in my opinion, this is highly improbable given his loving and family-oriented nature. So, if this was foul play, who could have done this to Jared? Well, there are no named suspects at this moment in time. However, given his last sighting was outside the Airbnb, could he have been kidnapped by somebody who was living in Seattle? This certainly can't be ruled out, but without any evidence, it's difficult to narrow down one particular suspect. Perhaps if the police can uncover more surveillance footage of Jared driving his car, this may lead us to more clues, but until then, we will just have to wait and see. Now, this final theory, I will warn you, is extremely outlandish and is purely based on speculation alone. But could this case be possibly linked to the equally mysterious disappearance of Yohanes Kidane? Now, this was a case I personally covered a few days ago on my channel, so if you would like more details, make sure to check it out after this one. I'll leave a link in the description below. But just to quickly summarise, Yohanes was also a young man of North African descent that had recently travelled across the country on a solo trip, only to go missing soon after arriving. He was also an extremely hard-working and intelligent person who had managed to land a lucrative position with Netflix in California, the very same state that Jared's car was found in just 3 days after Yohanes' disappearance. Now, these aren't the only similarities. Both men were born in New York and were described as being family-oriented people who would usually keep their loved ones updated with their plans. Also, they both disappeared under very strange circumstances, which has caused a lot of controversy around their cases. But saying this, how can we actually link these two missing people together? Well, as I mentioned, Jared's car was found in the same state as where Yohanes went missing 3 days earlier, so the timelines certainly match up. But why was Jared's car in California in the first place? This isn't a question we can currently answer, but for argument's sake, let's say Jared finished moving into his Airbnb in Seattle and decided to go and explore the area. Maybe he had a date planned with somebody he had met online, or maybe he just decided to go for a drive. But either way, he somehow ends up crossing paths with a nefarious character who eventually overpowers him and steals the car. Perhaps they even take Jared's life in the process, or maybe that was the plan all along. But after hiding the body and stealing the vehicle, the suspect then heads south to continue their spree. They follow the west coast and drive down to San Francisco, where they set their sights on the next victim, Yohanes Kidane. The suspect eventually befriends the young man and they agree to meet near the Golden Gate Bridge on the 14th of August. However, rather than a friendly meetup, Yohanes becomes another victim of this potential suspect. And once again, they hide the body and flee south, this time heading to Los Angeles. Perhaps they then decide to ditch Jared's car in a random neighbourhood to relieve suspicion and use a different mode of transport to escape. From this point, anything is possible, but with LA being only a 2-hour drive from the border to Mexico, I wouldn't be surprised if the suspect eventually fled the country as well. Now, once again, I'll just be explicit in saying this is all purely my own personal theory and it has absolutely no official weight to it. But I do think the similarities in the cases raise questions. So if this theory is in fact true, it wouldn't be too unbelievable in my opinion. Anyway, with that I think I'll leave this video here, but I'd just like to give a quick special mention to Brenda Hines for bringing this case to my attention, and for providing the basis for the final theory. But if you have any other ideas of your own, or maybe a similar case which you feel might be worth covering on this channel, please let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to get back to you. But either way, thank you for watching and remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to check out my previous video on Yohanes Kidane, which is on screen now.